Amelie was the kind of woman most people didn't notice. Every morning, she arrived early at K-Tech Holdings, dressed in soft-colored Ankara skirts and neat blouses. Her smile was gentle, and her voice never rose above a whisper. She brought tea before anyone asked, solved problems before they became crises, and remembered things even the CEO forgot. To them, she was just the assistant, someone to take notes, fix calendars, and stay out of the way. But Amelie was watching everything, listening, learning. She stayed late after everyone had gone home, sometimes staring at the glass windows, imagining a world where she wasn't invisible. In those quiet hours, she read business plans, rewrote contracts, and even corrected numbers in the investor slides, while others took the credit. But she never complained. She never bragged. What they didn't know was that Amelie had her own vision, her own plan. Every paycheck she earned, she invested silently. Every insult she received, she turned into fuel. She wasn't just surviving K-Tech, she was studying it from the inside out. And while they looked right through her, Amelie was quietly building something far bigger than a job. She was building her moment, and it was coming soon. Lyra and Nomi had known each other since they were 5. They grew up on the same dusty street in Ebitala, shared schoolbooks, and dreamed under the same stars. Their friendship was the kind people admired. If you saw one, the other was never far behind. Nomi knew everything: Lyra's first crush, her worst fears, even the songs she played when she was sad. Lyra trusted her like a sister, maybe even more. When Lyra's mother passed away, it was Nomi who held her while she cried. When Nomi's father abandoned them, it was Lyra who helped her stay strong. Their bond had no conditions, no doubts. They had promised each other a lifetime of loyalty. So when Lyra got married to Duma, Nomi stood right beside her, smiling wide in a golden bridesmaid dress, even fixing Lyra's veil before she walked down the aisle. Lyra thought, how lucky am I? My best friend and my husband, my 2 biggest blessings. She never imagined they would become her deepest wounds. What hurts the most isn't that Duma betrayed her. It's that Nomi did. The one person who saw all her vulnerable moments, who wiped her tears, who cheered the loudest at her wedding, was also the one who sneaked behind her back. Lyra often thought back to the nights they would sit by candlelight, dreaming of the future. Nomi always said, we'll grow old together, no matter where life takes us. But life took them somewhere darker, somewhere painful. And what broke Lyra's heart wasn't just the affair. It was the lies, the silence, the fake smiles, the way Nomi hugged her with the same hands that touched Duma. That's a different kind of betrayal. One that burns longer. One that doesn't just hurt, it haunts. Lyra didn't lose a friend. She lost a piece of her past, her trust, and the girl who once promised, I'd never hurt you. But she did. And she did it with a smile. At first Lyra tried to ignore it. She told herself she was just overthinking. But deep down, something didn't feel right anymore. Duma, who used to rush home just to eat dinner with her, suddenly started working late, almost every night. When she asked, he always had a reason. Deadlines, he'd say, or just one more client meeting. He stopped noticing the small things, her new hairstyle, the perfume she wore just for him, the soft tears she quietly wiped when he turned away too fast. Lyra's heart began to ache, not from anything he said, but from the growing silence between them. And then there was Nomi. Her smile wasn't the same. It had a nervous twitch now, like it was hiding something. She started avoiding eye contact. She didn't stay over as much. She laughed too loudly at things that weren't funny and always changed the subject when Duma's name came up. Lyra saw it all, but she didn't want to believe it. She wanted to hold on to her peace, to the love she had poured her soul into. But love doesn't cover everything. It can't hide what your heart already knows. Sometimes when Lyra walked into a room, both Duma and Nomi would fall silent, as if they had just pressed pause on a conversation she wasn't meant to hear. Her stomach would tighten, but she still smiled. She cooked for them. She sat beside them. She forced herself to believe that everything was fine. But late at night, when the house was quiet and only the ticking clock kept her company, her thoughts screamed. Her gut whispered the truth her mind wasn't ready for. Lyra didn't have proof, just 1,000 tiny cracks in her soul that kept spreading. It was the lipstick stain on a glass that wasn't hers. The scent of Nomi's lotion lingering in her home longer than it should. The way Duma's phone was suddenly always face down. Suspicion grew in silence. And sometimes silence speaks louder than words ever could. Emily heard every whisper, every little comment, every fake smile followed by an eye roll as soon as she turned around. She's just a secretary, they said. Why is she always in meetings? Some joked that she was trying too hard. Others claimed she was only close to the CEO because she made good coffee. The cruel ones even suggested she was only there because of how she looked. But Emily never reacted. She kept her head down, her focus sharp, and her heart steady. In meetings, when she tried to speak up with an idea or a correction, some senior staff would interrupt her mid-sentence. Others would nod politely but ignore her completely, as if her voice didn't matter. She wasn't part of their inner circle. She didn't wear designer suits or drive a fancy car. To them, she wasn't important enough to be taken seriously. And yet, Emily never stopped showing up. She sat in those rooms, took every note, watched every move, and remembered who smiled in her face and mocked her behind her back. She pretended not to hear, but it hurt. Of course it did. She was human. There were nights she cried quietly in her bedroom, wondering why kindness and hard work were never enough. But each time she wiped her tears, she reminded herself, they only whispered because they were afraid. Deep down, they could feel there was something different about her. She didn't gossip, she didn't compete, and she didn't play office politics. She moved with quiet power, and that made them uncomfortable. Emily knew her worth didn't depend on their opinions. She didn't need their validation to rise. Every insult, every laugh behind her back, was a small brick in the foundation she was building. A foundation that would one day lift her above all of them, not through revenge but through results. And when that day came, the same people who whispered behind her back would be the ones saying her name out loud with respect and maybe even regret. Lyra didn't scream. She didn't throw things or fall to the floor in tears. That wasn't her way. After walking out of the room that night, she sat on the edge of the couch, hands shaking, eyes staring into nothing. Her whole world had just crumbled, but she didn't break. She went silent. A deep, heavy silence, the kind that says more than any words ever could. She got up slowly, walked to the bedroom closet and began to pack. Not everything. Just a few clothes, her journals, her favorite scarf, and a framed photo of her late mother. No one stopped her. Not Duma. Not Nomi. No one dared to speak. She didn't need answers anymore. She had seen enough. Lyra left that house before sunrise. The same house she once prayed over, laughed in, cried in. She walked out with quiet dignity. There was no goodbye. No final look. Just a door that closed behind her. To the world, it might have looked like a woman walking away from her marriage. But to Lyra it was something deeper. She wasn't breaking down. She was choosing herself. Everyone expected her to fall apart. Maybe cry to friends, maybe beg him to stay, maybe curse Nomi in public. But Lyra didn't do any of that. She went to a small guest house by the lake, one her cousin owned, and turned off her phone. For the first time in a long time, she sat with her pain, not to be destroyed by it, but to understand it, to feel every ache, every betrayal, every tear that refused to fall that night. This wasn't weakness. This was strength in its rawest form. Lyra wasn't running away. She was rising, quietly, slowly, in her own time, in her own way. She didn't know exactly what healing looked like yet, but one thing was clear. She would never again shrink herself for someone who couldn't see her worth. This wasn't the end. It was her beginning. A new chapter written not with pain but with power. In Ebitala, news didn't travel, it flew. And when Lyra disappeared without a word, the gossip started before the sun even rose. Neighbors whispered over fences. Market women shook their heads. Did you hear? Lyra caught them in bed. She must be crushed. Poor thing, she ran away in shame. Some even said she had lost her mind, gone somewhere to cry herself to sleep every night. The stories got worse each day, and not once did anyone stop to ask what really happened. But Lyra heard none of it. She was far away from the noise, tucked into a quiet guest house near Lake Adani, surrounded by soft winds, singing birds, and her own thoughts. She didn't open social media. She didn't answer calls. For the first time in years, she was alone with herself. And it didn't feel lonely. It felt peaceful. While the world thought she was broken, she was actually rebuilding. Day by day, piece by piece. She started journaling again, pouring her pain onto paper and turning it into power. She began walking every morning by the lake, breathing in freedom with every step. She enrolled in an online business course she had once postponed for marriage. She made tea with her favorite herbs and reminded herself that healing wasn't loud. It was quiet, slow, and sacred. Lyra looked at herself in the mirror one evening and finally saw it. Not the woman who had been betrayed, but the woman who had survived it. Stronger, wiser, softer but sharper. They thought she had run away. But she hadn't. She had chosen to step away from the noise, the pain, the people who didn't value her. She wasn't hiding. She was healing. She wasn't ashamed. She was awakening. And while they all waited to see her return with tears in her eyes, they had no idea. Lyra wasn't planning a comeback for their approval. She was preparing a return they would never forget. Weeks passed. Abatala had moved on, or at least pretended to. Duma and Nomi were now seen together more openly. Some people stared. Others smiled politely. But most just gossiped behind closed doors. They thought the storm had passed. That Lyra was gone for good. That she had disappeared into heartbreak and would never be seen again. But then the gold envelope arrived. It was hand-delivered, thick, shiny and trimmed with gold. The kind of envelope used for royal weddings or celebrity events. On the front in elegant script it read, "To Duma and Nomi." They looked at each other confused, curious. Nomi opened it with shaky hands. Inside was a stunning ivory invitation card, with gold foil details and delicate flower designs. At the center in bold, graceful letters it read, "You are invited to the wedding of Lyra Adebayo." The date was just 3 weeks away. The venue Muneo Gardens, the most expensive and exclusive wedding location in the region. The kind of place where governors married off their daughters. The kind of place Nomi had once dreamed of for herself. First they were silent. Then came the questions. Who is she marrying? Is it real? Why invite us? Their hands trembled, and their hearts felt uneasy. Duma tried to laugh it off. She's trying to get attention. But even he didn't believe his own words. The whole town began buzzing. Word spread faster than fire. Lyra is getting married. Her name was on everyone's lips again, but this time not with pity, with surprise, admiration, and curiosity. Some thought it was fake. Others believed she had found a new man, maybe a rich businessman or a prince from out of town. But no one knew for sure. Only one thing was clear. Lyra wasn't broken. She was back. And whatever she was planning, it wasn't just a wedding. It was something bigger. Something unforgettable. And Nomi and Duma, they had been personally invited to witness it. The sun shone brightly over Muneo Gardens, making the glass chandeliers hanging from the outdoor tents sparkle like stars. Every corner of the venue screamed luxury. Golden chairs, fresh white roses, silk tablecloths, and a long red carpet leading to the altar. It looked like something out of a fairy tale. Guests arrived in style, wearing their best lace gowns, embroidered agbatas, and geli head wraps tied high with pride. There were local celebrities, politicians' wives, socialites, and even reporters. Everyone had one question on their lips. Who is Lyra marrying? But no one had answers. People whispered in groups, looking around for any clue. She disappeared and now she's back with a wedding? Maybe it's a rich foreigner. Maybe it's revenge. The mystery only made the event more thrilling. The invitation had only said, Lyra Adebayo's wedding. No groom's name. No photo. Just a time and a place. Duma and Nomi arrived together, but their smiles were fake. Nomi's dress sparkled, but her hands were cold. Duma tried to act unfazed, but he kept scanning the venue, looking for signs of a man. Any man. Both of them were uncomfortable, because deep down they knew this wasn't just a wedding. It was a message. The altar was grand, decorated with white flowers and glowing candles. A solo violinist played soft music as guests waited. Still no groom. No best man. No sign of a bridal train. People began to murmur, confused but excited. Is this a joke? Is she really getting married today? Or is something else happening? But no one dared to leave. Everyone stayed in their seats, hearts racing, eyes glued to the entrance. Because if Lyra had come back after all that heartbreak, she didn't come back to do something ordinary. She came back to make a statement. And Muneo Gardens, with all its sparkle and secrets, was the perfect stage. The music changed. Soft, slow, emotional. Everyone turned toward the aisle, expecting to see Lyra walking in with a handsome man beside her. But what they saw left the entire garden breathless. Lyra walked in alone. She wore a stunning royal indigo gown that flowed like liquid silk behind her. The dress shimmered in the sunlight, hugging her figure perfectly, with a long cape gently trailing the floor like a queen's robe. Her makeup was soft, her gilly head wrap tall and proud. She walked with calm confidence, no rush, no fear. Every step echoed strength. There was no groom by her side, no father, no brother, no escort, just Lyra. People gasped. Some sat up straighter. Others whispered in shock. Where is the groom? Is this part of the plan? She's walking alone? But Lyra didn't flinch. She didn't need to explain herself. Her walk said everything. It said, I am not broken. It said, I don't need saving. It said, I choose myself. Duma's smile faded completely. Nomi's lips parted, but no words came out. They both stared at the woman they thought would stay down forever. But here she was, rising higher than ever. Lyra reached the altar and turned to face the crowd. Her eyes scanned every face. Calm, steady, unshaken. Her gown sparkled under the soft light. She wasn't just a bride. She was a storm dressed in beauty and grace. There was no fear in her presence, only power. She didn't come to marry a man. She came to marry her future. She stood there alone, but she wasn't lonely. She was whole. Complete. Enough. Every person in that garden could feel it in their bones. This wasn't a wedding. It was a rebirth. And Lyra? She wasn't waiting to be chosen anymore. She had already chosen herself. Lyra stepped up to the mic, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor beneath the altar. The guests were still whispering, confused by the absence of a groom. Some had leaned forward, waiting for someone to join her. Others thought maybe the groom would walk in late as a surprise. But when Lyra took the mic and turned to face the crowd, everyone went silent. She smiled gently, her eyes glowing, not with anger but peace. Calm, steady, graceful. Thank you all for coming, she began, her voice clear and soft. I know many of you came here today expecting to see me marry someone. A man. Partner. A love story. But today I've chosen something different. People leaned in closer. Today, she said, pausing for a moment as she looked directly at Duma and Nomi sitting near the front. I marry the woman who loved me the most me. The crowd gasped. Chairs shifted. Mouths opened. Hands covered lips. Duma's face went pale. Nomi's eyes widened, her jaw trembling. They had expected drama, maybe even revenge. But they hadn't expected this kind of power. This kind of grace. This kind of freedom. Lyra stood tall, her smile never fading. For years I gave everything I had, my love, my time, my loyalty. I forgot how to love myself. I let others eat from my plate while I went hungry. But not anymore. Her voice didn't shake. This is my day. My new beginning. Not to prove anything to the people who betrayed me, but to honor the woman who survived it. Tears welled up in a few guests' eyes. A few women nodded slowly, moved beyond words. This wasn't just a statement, it was a revolution. Lyra gently placed the mic down, picked up a simple ring from the velvet box beside her, and slid it onto her own finger. A symbol. Promise. To never forget her worth again. And just like that, she turned heartbreak into history. This wasn't a wedding of two. It was the crowning of one. And she wore that crown with no shame, only power. Lyra stood at the altar, holding a small card in her hand. But these weren't traditional vows. There was no groom waiting to hold her hand, no promises of for better or worse to another person. These vows were different, deeper. They were for her. For the woman who had been torn, bruised, abandoned and still rose. The music stopped. All eyes were on her. The garden was silent, as if the world was holding its breath. She looked out at the crowd and then back at herself in the small mirror placed on the table beside her. Slowly she began to speak. For so long I thought love meant sacrificing myself. I thought being a good wife meant ignoring the voice inside me when it cried for help. I thought loyalty meant staying silent, even when it hurt, she said, her voice soft but steady. But today I make new promises. To me. She took a deep breath. I vow to never shrink myself to make others feel bigger. I vow to listen when my heart whispers, not just when it screams. I promise to protect my peace, even if it means walking alone. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. I promise to forgive myself, for ignoring red flags, for trusting people who didn't deserve me, for staying too long. I promise to speak kindly to myself, to believe in myself, to fight for my dreams again. She placed her hand gently over her chest. And most importantly, I promise to never betray myself again. There wasn't a single dry eye in the crowd. Even those who came out of curiosity now sat in awe. These weren't just words, they were a healing, a cleansing, a declaration of worth. Duma sat frozen, guilt heavy on his face. Nomi looked down, unable to meet Lyra's eyes. But Lyra didn't look their way. Her focus was on something bigger, her future. This wasn't just a ceremony. It was a sacred moment. A woman choosing herself, fully, publicly, proudly. As the ceremony ended and the sun began to set over Muneo Gardens, waiters in crisp white uniforms began handing out small cream-colored gift boxes to every guest. Each box was tied with a delicate indigo ribbon, the same shade as Lyra's gown. People smiled, thinking they were about to receive a fancy thank you gift. Maybe chocolates, scented candles, or souvenir jewelry. But when the boxes were opened, the garden fell into an eerie silence. Inside each box were photographs. Clear, undeniable, painful photographs of Duma and Nomi. In hotel lobbies, in the back seat of his car, holding hands behind closed doors, kissing in dimly lit corners, laughing on nights they told Lyra they were just running errands or busy with work. Proof. Receipts. Every single photo dated and time-stamped. And tucked neatly beneath the photos was a handwritten note from Lyra. Just one sentence. This was never about revenge. It was about release. Guests sat stunned. Some gasped. Others looked around, unsure of what to say or do. Whispers swept through the garden like a sudden windstorm. She knew all along. She had the receipts. She planned all this with so much grace. No shouting. No drama. Just truth served cold and quiet. Duma stared at the photos in disbelief, his hands shaking. Nomi's face turned white, then red, then pale again. The shame hit harder than any insult ever could. Because Lyra hadn't exposed them out of spite. She had done it with elegance. With peace. With power. It wasn't about hurting them. It was about setting herself free. Every person who opened that box didn't just witness the betrayal. They felt the weight of what Lyra had carried in silence. The pain. The dignity. The decision to walk away without a single scream, only strength. It was the kind of truth that didn't scream, it echoed. And in that moment everyone finally understood. Lyra didn't just walk away. She let go. By the next morning Lyra's story was everywhere. Videos from the ceremony flooded social media. Clips of her walking alone down the aisle in that royal indigo gown. Her vows to herself. And the moment guests opened those small boxes with the photos inside. People reposted, shared, and commented faster than a wildfire. Hashtags like hashtag Lyra the Queen, hashtag self-love wedding, and hashtag rebirth bride trended for days. Women across Abatala and even far beyond felt something shift. They saw themselves in Lyra's pain and felt hope in her courage. She was no longer just the woman who was cheated on. She was something bigger, something powerful. A symbol of healing, of standing tall after being crushed, of rewriting your own story on your own terms. Interviews started pouring in. Journalists called her brave. Therapists quoted her words about never betraying yourself again. Influencers used her story to inspire their followers, calling her a new kind of queen, one who didn't need a king. And Lyra? She watched it all quietly from the guest house near Lake Adani, her heart still fragile but beating stronger each day. She had never planned to go viral. She only wanted to free herself. But now thousands of women were thanking her, writing messages about how they too would choose themselves from this day forward. Even older aunties who once gossiped about her now called to say, "We are proud of you, child." Lyra felt the weight lift off her shoulders, a little more with every kind word. She was no longer alone. She had started a movement without meaning to, one that told every woman, your worth is not tied to who stays or who leaves. Your worth is tied to you. Lyra smiled softly as she read the messages flooding her phone. Her journey had begun in heartbreak, but it was ending in power. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was leading, rising, and the world had no choice but to watch her shine. Lyra didn't just heal, she transformed. What started as a personal act of courage became the beginning of a whole new life. After her story went viral, brands started reaching out. Clothing labels wanted her to model confidence. Book publishers offered her deals to write her story. Mental health organizations asked her to speak to young women. Suddenly, the same voice that had once been quiet in her own marriage was now echoing across stages and screens. She accepted every opportunity, but on her terms. No filters. No pretending. She spoke from the heart, sharing her pain, her strength, and how she found herself again after being betrayed by the two people she trusted most. Her honesty hit deep. Women cried at her talks. Young girls lined up for photos. Aunties thanked her for saying things they were never allowed to say. She launched her own foundation, the Rebirth Project, which supported women going through emotional betrayal, divorce, and identity loss. She created workshops, safe spaces, and programs that helped women rebuild, not just survive. Slowly, Lyra became more than a story. She became a movement. Her days were now full of color. Early morning interviews, powerful stage talks, late-night journal entries by the lake. She wore bold colors again. She danced without fear. She laughed without guilt. And most of all, she loved herself without apology. Duma and Nomi became nothing more than names from her past. People still whispered about them, but Lyra never mentioned them again. She had no need. She had already said everything that needed to be said. With her silence, her strength, and her success. This was her empire now, built not on revenge but on rebirth. Lyra didn't need to shout to prove anything. She simply lived, fully, loudly, beautifully. And this time she made one thing clear. No more shrinking. No more begging. No more apologies. Only power. Only peace. Lyra now lives in a quiet, sun-kissed home near Lake Awoja, surrounded by still waters and soft winds. Every morning she wakes up to the sound of birds, not the weight of betrayal. She makes her tea slowly, walks barefoot in the garden, and watches the sunrise like it's her personal miracle. There's no chaos, no pretending, no walking on eggshells. Just peace. Real quiet peace. She no longer checks her phone with fear. She doesn't cry into her pillow or ask herself why she wasn't enough. That version of Lyra, the one who begged for love, who gave everything without being seen, is gone. In her place stands a woman who knows exactly who she is. The betrayal that once shattered her didn't break her forever. It woke her up. It reminded her of her worth. And instead of staying in that pain, she turned it into something powerful. She became her own home, her own healer, her own queen. People still talk about her, but not with pity anymore. Now they speak with awe. She's the woman who married herself. She turned heartbreak into a whole movement. She walked alone and still won. Lyra doesn't need a crown to feel royal. Her peace is her crown now. And every time she looks at the lake's calm reflection, she sees it clearly. A woman who was broken but never destroyed. A queen who walked alone and never looked back.